Hi there, this is Dr. Nate Storey from Bright Agrotech, and this is Aquaponics Academy episode number 7. Today we're going to talk about microbes and how important they are to successful aquaponic growing. We're going to talk about what they're doing for you as a grower and different ways that you can foster them, ways that you can support your microbial communities, and how to recognize when they're starting to have some problems.
Welcome to Aquaponics Academy, a Bright Agrotech podcast designed to help you overcome common aquaponic issues, learn new growing techniques, and help you be as successful as you can be as an aquaponic practitioner. Join aquaponics expert Dr. Nate Storey as he breaks down complex topics into easy-to-understand information.
If any of you have listened to any of the other materials I've put out, you know that I think that microbes are the heart and the soul of just about any aquaponics system. Without the microbes, the system can't exist. They mediate all of the different processes that take place in our system. All of them. Everything from digestion in the gut of the fish to nutrient uptake at the roots of the plants. Microbes are involved with all of it. And of course, they are also involved in nitrification and mineralization processes, which are what they're really most famous for in aquaponic systems. So today we're going to talk a little bit about these microbes, what they're doing in your system, and how you can help them thrive. So the first part of this podcast really just talks about the role of microbes in aquaponic systems. So those of you who have done your research, you know that microbes are responsible for the nitrification processes in aquaponic systems. This is absolutely true, but it's really very myopic. Okay, so microbes do a lot more than nitrification, but nitrification is what we're most familiar with, so that's what we'll talk about first. So nitrification processes are just taking ammonia, okay, or ammonium, and oxidizing it into nitrate eventually, right? So we take ammonia or ammonium, we oxidize it to nitrite, and then that in turn is oxidized into nitrate. So there are two different bacteria that are most popular or most famous for doing this oxidation process, and that's Nitrobacter and Nitrosomonas. So Nitrosomonas is primarily the bacteria that helps turn ammonia into nitrite, and then Nitrobacter is the bacteria that helps turn nitrite into nitrate. Now, these bacteria get a lot of press, okay? But the important thing to know is that they're not the only microbes doing this in your system. There are hundreds, if not thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of different microbes out there that perform these nitrification processes. And I can't guarantee you that Nitrobacter or Nitrosomonas are the dominant strains in your particular system. So that's kind of an interesting thing, and it's kind of a fun thing, but it's certainly something that we need to remember and need to be keeping track of. So when someone says, nitrification, only works at pH values of 7 or above, because that's where Nitrosomonas and Nitrobacter are happiest, it's always worth stepping back a little bit and saying, well, that's operating under the assumption that Nitrobacter and Nitrosomonas are the primary microbes performing nitrification operations in my system. So this is something to think about, something to keep in mind. And for many of you out there who run your system very low, say at 5, the high 5s and 6, you know that nitrification can proceed at very low pH values. And, I'm sure that Nitrobacter and Nitrosomonas are playing some role there, but I'm also sure that you've got all sorts of other exotic, interesting bacteria in your system that are performing those processes for you. So that's really the thing to remember all the time with bacteria, is never assume that you know what's going on, because the world of bacteria is so diverse, and there's so many amazing types of bacteria out there performing so many amazing different functions that it's really impossible for us to say we actually know what's going on here. So besides that, we have mineralization processes, okay? And mineralization processes basically, it's kind of a catch-all term for taking these organic compounds and breaking them down. It can be through a variety of different processes, but basically what we're taking is solid waste, and we're taking that solid waste and we're breaking it down into plant available nutrients. And this happens in lots of different little microbial environments, anaerobic and aerobic. It happens at all sorts of different pH values, high and low, at different temperatures. And of course, there's just thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of different bacterial species that are out there doing all of these amazing little processes in your system. So, the point of all of this is just to say that there's a lot of bacteria out there, and they do really, really cool stuff in our systems. And, honestly, we really have no idea what species many of them are. And the reason for that is it's very tough for us to take samplings of bacteria and get them to grow in a lab. What ends up happening is that if we sample a system, we basically can only sample the bacteria that can survive in a Petri dish, right? So that at the end of the day really limits our ability, our insight into the world of bacteria and our insight into the world of all these amazing little organisms that really make our system run. So the second part here is how we talk about or how we establish and foster strong microbial communities. And fostering a strong microbial community is key to getting a healthy system and to seeing that system maturity that all of us want to see in our system. So that at around 6 months, you start to see your system pick up a little bit in productivity. And after about 18 months, the system really comes into its own. You see this maturation process, and at a certain point, the system becomes very stable and very predictable. Right? So what we're actually seeing there is kind of this establishment period where all these bacteria are moving into your system. They're moving in, they're finding the environment that suits them best, they're figuring out what their food sources are, and they're basically growing and colonizing your system. After that initial colonization process, you kind of have this maturation that starts to take place. So all of these microbes, they move into this vacuum, right? And they don't have to compete initially. They just establish. And then after a certain amount of time, it becomes more and more crowded. There's more and more microbes. There's less biological surface area. And all of a sudden, there starts to be competition. So as this competition, competitive element starts to grow, you see more bacteria kind of becoming dominant in the system. Some are becoming less dominant. And all of these correspond with different work in the system, right? All of these microbial communities do something. So they're performing some type of work in your system. So as some become dominant, some become less dominant, you see the system kind of fluctuate a little bit there in that interim, and then all of a sudden, once the communities are established and kind of once the balance is struck, your system just evens out. And that's kind of usually you start to see it around the 6-month mark, but around the 1 year to 18-month mark, it usually becomes really evident in these systems. And the bacteria have found their place, and they are happy as clams, just chugging along and mineralizing those waste products and oxidizing that ammonia and doing all of that work that we value them for. And so that's always a sweet spot to hit. But as far as the establishment goes, the nice thing about these systems is that you don't actually have to do that much to get the bacteria established. You just have to try and be consistent. Okay. So what I mean by that is you want to make sure that you're feeding your fish on a consistent basis, that you're maintaining your water chemicals at certain levels, so your ammonia's at a certain level, nitrites, preferably very low, nitrates, trying to keep them within a certain range, pH. Trying to pick a range within about 4, 5, 6 tenths of a pH point, and keeping it within that range. And you're just trying to basically help the bacteria in your system stabilize. It's good for your plants. It's good for your fish. It's good for your bacteria. So we just basically want to have a nice, consistent management strategy for our system. And if we're managing our system really consistently, all of these bacteria, they colonize, they establish, and they really kind of start to find their place and do their thing. But the key element here is that we have to provide biological surface area. And that is just a description of the amount of square feet or square inches in your entire system. The amount of surface area directly correlates with the amount of bacteria that your system can house. So your system is limited in how many different types of bacteria by the environments that you have. It's limited in the quantity of those bacteria by the biological surface area found in those environments. So, if you have little anaerobic regions, this is not a bad thing necessarily in very small amounts, so long as it's contained and put in a certain place. Why? Because it allows some of your more anaerobic bacterial species to do their thing. Now, I say that with some caveats, and you certainly don't want anaerobic zones in your grow beds. You want to basically be thoughtful about where you allow those anaerobic zones to develop, and you want to make sure that by and large 95, 97% of your system is highly aerobic. But all that to say that a diversity of environments can really, really help you get a good, diverse microbial community going. And a good, diverse microbial community can really perform for you and can really help your system achieve new levels of productivity. So biological surface area is something that I encourage everyone to think about. A lot of the time people will ask me, well, what is the correct plants to fish ratio? And I say that's nonsensical. I mean, talking about the number of plants to the number of fish makes zero sense because that has nothing to do with the chemistry of our system. What really mediates the chemistry of our system is the microbes. And what really defines the amount of microbes we can have in our system, the sheer mass, the microbial mass, is biological surface area. So the more biological surface area we have, the more bacterial communities we have, the more bacterial mass we have, and the more ability we have to really process ammonia and these other waste products as soon as they're available. So the goal of any system should be to blow your biological surface area way up. Okay? Don't be thinking about the number of fish per plants. Think about the number of fish per square feet of biological surface area in your system. That is the measurement you should always be going back to. Now, of course, that measurement is nuanced as well. The amount of fish in pounds of fish per square feet of biological surface area, that depends, of course, on the rates that you're feeding your fish at. And, of course, it depends on a few other things. But at the end of the day, for a beginner, that's what you should be thinking about. And if you have any questions about that, make sure you watch the YouTube video I did on specific surface area and biological surface area. So along these lines, biological surface area is just the total number of square feet of surface area in our system. That's basically the amount of real estate that our microbes can colonize. And once they've colonized it, they're happy. And if you guys have any questions about that, make sure you check out my video because I talk about specific surface area. And that is just basically the amount of square feet per cubic feet of media, because your media is always going to be your major source of biological surface area in your system. The insides of your pipes, the walls of your tanks, all of these surfaces are biological surface area. But the amount of surface area in a single one of my towers really makes a lot of the surface area in, say, one of my tanks completely irrelevant, because there's just so much more biological surface area in a tower compared to tanks. So be thinking about that, and always think in terms of biological surface area. Do not be thinking in number of plants per fish, number of fish per plants, because those are really dumbed down ratios that at the end of the day can cause you to design some really off-balance systems. Because the size of plants varies, the size of fish varies, the amount you're feeding your fish really varies, the amount of nutrients plants are taking up varies. All of these things are way too variable to be accurate predictors of whether your system will be balanced or not. So check out the video on specific surface area. That's going to answer a lot of your questions about how many pounds of fish you can load per square foot of biological surface area. So kind of the next part here is, how do we maintain our strong communities? And of course, coming off of the last kind of part of this podcast, I'm going to say maintain that high biological surface area. Don't detract, just add, okay? You can't have too much biological surface area in a system. Well, let me take that back. You can, but I've never seen it. The reality is that, it's very difficult to have so much biological surface area that you start to harm your system. Now, the only instance where that would happen is if I loaded my system up with so much biological surface area, my microbial communities became so incredibly dense, that anytime ammonia went into the system, it was quickly consumed and oxidized, and pretty soon I had nitrite, or I had denitrification, all these other weird little processes that can happen. At the end of the day, if those microbial communities became a sink, that means if nutrients flowing into the system ended up in my microbes instead of my plants, for the most part, that would be too many microbes. But the amount of biological surface area you'd need to get to that point would be just insane. So that's not something you should be worried about. You should always be thinking about how you can give your microbes more territory, more real estate. Think about how you can make them happier. So as far as fostering them goes, just shoot for system stability. Okay, try to maintain your system in a consistent pH range. Try to maintain it at a fairly consistent temperature. You will notice a reduction in all of these processes when your water gets really cold. These are chemical processes, and the warmer the water, the faster the process. It's like high school chemistry all over again. So, keep that in mind. Warmer water fosters faster reactions. So, if you want to see really fast results, warm that water up, keep those microbes good and happy, give them a lot of biological surface area, and get good at sending your wastewater to those microbes as quick as you can, and turning over that system water a lot. So oftentimes, the more you're turning over your system water, the more nutrients are available to the microbes in a faster time scale, and you get really, really happy microbes, and you see really good filtration, you see really good oxidation, you see really good mineralization. All these processes proceed very nicely. So keep that in mind. Also keep in mind that if you're seeing deficiencies in your plants, there's a good probability that some of your microbes are deficient in some nutrients as well. Remember that microbes need nutrients the same way plants do. And if your water chemistry is not well balanced, if you're not supplying certain plant nutrients in high enough quantities for your plants, there's a good ability that some of your microbes might not be the happiest. Now, I've never seen, say, nitrification crash or anything like that. I'm not necessarily talking about your nitrifying bacteria, but I am talking about a lot of other communities that perform more peripheral kind of functions. And these are microbes that are doing mineralization processes and other things in your system. But a well-balanced system, a nutritionally balanced system, makes for really happy, healthy microbes. And the happier and healthier they are, the faster reactions you get, and the more aggressive you can be with feeding, the more aggressive you can be about dosing your system and keeping your plants happy. So one thing to kind of keep an eye out for, a lot of people ask me about, well, how do I recognize when the microbes are starting to lose steam, or when my microbial communities are dying or crashing or what have you? And a lot of the time, crashes, whether they're microbial crashes of some sort, are blamed on the wrong things. So a lot of the time, people will call me up and say, hey, I've got this problem, it killed all my plants, and I think my microbes have all pooped out. If they have, sometimes people do really boneheaded things like add lemon juice, or they'll add some kind of antimicrobial compound to their water. And yes, that can crash your microbial communities. But by and large, these things are pretty resilient, okay? And they can be pretty darn hard to kill. So if you're having a crash, more often than not, it's going to be related to your dissolved oxygen or your temperature or something like that. Even when you see pH-related reductions in your nitrification efficiency, a lot of the time it has its roots in something else. So, people will see these ammonia spikes after a fish dies. You have one dead fish, and the first thing I do is I stop feeding for like a day. If there's a single dead fish, I stop feeding. Well, a lot of people just continue to feed. What they don't understand is that fish might have sat on the bottom of the tank for a day or two before it decided to float up, and it's already dumped a whole bunch of ammonia into their system. All these proteins that were on the outside of that fish are decomposing. Maybe some of its guts leaked out. I don't know. But at the end of the day, that fish has already polluted your system, and you've already got an ammonia spike. And so you add some feed on top of that, and you get a bigger ammonia spike, and pretty soon all of your other fish are stressed. And maybe that dead fish consumed a lot of the decomp consumed a lot of oxygen in your system, and all of a sudden you've got this system crash. And a lot of people will say, oh, well, it's my microbes. And I always say, well, it's not your microbes. You may not have had enough microbes. That might be the problem. But the reason you're seeing this ammonia spike is not because your microbes are not nitrifying ammonia. It's because they're not nitrifying it fast enough. There's more ammonia going into the system than the microbes can really deal with. So be careful about how you kind of think about things, and be thoughtful about your system. A lot of the times you have to play the role of Sherlock Holmes when it comes to system problems. And the easiest route is to blame things on the bacteria or to blame things on a bacterial crash. And that's really the way it's gone for a really long time, because you can't see them, you can't hear them, and if something's wrong, it always seems like it's the bacteria. But remember that they're very resilient, they're very tough, and they usually do their job unless something is very wrong. So if there is a crash, if there is a problem, it's probably not the bacteria, it's probably something else. But it is always good to think about what you're putting in your system. Make sure you're not putting anything in that's going to impact those microbes negatively. Now, almost all of the inputs that I recommend, everything from potassium hydroxide to chelated iron to chelated calcium or what have you, none of these things will have a negative effect on your bacteria. It won't have any effect, or it will be positive. So you don't have to worry about any of those inputs. But it's when you start talking about things like this artificial nitrification kind of additives, and some of these aquarium products, and a few of other products that people have used, things like citric acid or lemon juice for lowering pH. These things can have serious antimicrobial effects on your system. So just be very cautious and never use anything that you're unsure of. Because if you kill your bacteria in your system, you have to recycle, you have to start from scratch a lot of the time, and it can be a very, very difficult and miserable process, especially if you've already established a really great system. So that's pretty much it when it comes to microbes. And to recap, I will say that microbes are the heart and the soul of your system. They are the source of everything good when it comes to your aquaponic system. Do not undervalue them. And before you worry about your fish, before you worry about your plants, you really should be thinking about your microbes and how you can keep them happy, how you can keep them healthy, and how you can keep them doing the processes that they're designed to do. So thanks for tuning into this episode of Aquaponics Academy. And we hope that you got a lot out of it. We're hoping that you find this podcast helpful in your aquaponics journey, wherever you're at. And on behalf of everyone here at Bright Agrotech, we really hope you'll stay connected with us. We hope you'll subscribe to our podcasts and stay tuned for more helpful tips and techniques regarding aquaponics.